Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt that something was looking back at you, something that wasn't quite you? Imagine if that reflection started moving on its own, a distorted, twisted version of yourself that wanted to come out. And what if I told you this was more than just a fear? It was real. Meet Helena Braga, a young art history student with a fascination for rare artifacts. One day, she receives an unexpected inheritance from her grandmother, a secluded, aging estate on the edge of a forgotten forest. Among the heirlooms, Helena stumbles upon a peculiar mirror with an intricately ornate silver frame. Its glass is foggy, as if shrouded by a mist from within. The mirror has an uncanny pull, a silent invitation that Helena can't resist. Every time she glances at it, she feels as if her own reflection lingers a second too long, studying her with an unsettling intensity. On her first night in the house, Helena finds herself drawn to the mirror again, unable to look away. As she peers closer, a chill creeps down her spine, and she realizes that her own reflection is somehow wrong. Her reflected eyes seem darker, hollowed, as if hiding secrets she herself can't remember. She shakes it off, attributing it to her imagination, but the sensation lingers. The air around the mirror feels cold, the room growing darker as if the mirror itself absorbs the light, and Helena feels as though she is standing at the edge of a bottomless pit, where something ancient waits and watches from the other side. If you're intrigued by tales of the supernatural and cursed artifacts, be sure to like this video and subscribe, because tonight, we're diving into the terrifying mystery of the Mirror of Souls. Will Helena survive what lurks behind the glass, or will she lose herself to the shadows forever? Stick around to find out, if you dare. Helena drifts into an uneasy sleep, her mind weighed down by the eerie pull of the mirror. She finds herself standing in a dimly lit room, one she doesn't recognize but that feels strangely familiar, like a place hidden deep within her memories. In front of her is the mirror, much larger than before, looming over her like a dark, silent judge. Its glass pulses faintly, as though it has a heartbeat of its own. She tries to turn away, but something binds her gaze, forcing her to look deeper. Her breath fogs up the cold surface, and for a split second, she thinks she sees another face, a shadowy figure standing just behind her reflection. The air in the room is thick with the stale scent of decay and damp wood. As Helena takes a shaky step closer, the floor creaks, and she feels the sensation of soft, damp earth under her feet, like she's walking through an ancient burial ground. Whispers begin to drift through the darkness, faint and incoherent at first, but slowly growing louder, almost like voices trapped in the mirror's glass. She can't understand the words, but the tone is desperate, pleading, as if countless souls are calling out for help from beyond. The whispers crescendo, filling the room with a suffocating fear, and she instinctively reaches out to touch the glass, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The moment her fingers brush the cold, smooth surface, a shiver shoots up her spine, and her reflection suddenly changes. Her mirrored self now wears an expression of deep sorrow, her eyes hollow and devoid of life, a disturbing echo of something long forgotten. Helena's hand feels locked in place, unable to pull away as the reflection begins to shift and contort. Her face stretches into a twisted grin, the eyes darkening, filled with malice and hunger. Panic sets in, and she tries to scream, but no sound escapes her lips. It's as though the mirror itself has swallowed her voice. Just as the horror reaches its peak, Helena wakes up with a start, drenched in cold sweat. Her room is silent, her heart hammering against her chest as she glances at the mirror across the room. To her relief, it's still, the glass calm and unremarkable. But as she looks closer, a chill washes over her. There, in the corner of the mirror, is the faint outline of a handprint, smeared as if someone had tried to reach out. Helena can't shake the nightmare, nor the eerie handprint that lingers on the mirror, even after she tries scrubbing it clean. Every time she passes by, it feels as if the air around the mirror is colder, thicker, like a dense fog that clings to her skin. Days go by, but the sense of dread only grows, and the strange occurrences around her become impossible to ignore. Shadows in her peripheral vision seem to stretch and shift whenever she's near the mirror, and a soft, rhythmic tapping echoes through the room in the dead of night, as if someone on the other side is knocking, waiting for her to answer. One evening, Helena decides to confront her fears. She stands before the mirror, hands trembling as she peers into her own reflection. For a few moments, everything seems normal, her reflection staring back at her, mirroring her every move. But as she leans closer, studying her face, a chill runs down her spine. Her reflection doesn't blink when she does. Instead, it keeps staring back, eyes unblinking, a cruel smile creeping across its face. She feels trapped, unable to look away, her pulse quickening as her reflection's smile grows wider, twisting into a grotesque grin that seems to mock her fear. A creeping realization dawns on Helena. This isn't just a mirror, it's a window. Her reflection has a life of its own, a dark consciousness lurking behind the glass, mimicking her every expression, but with a sinister intent that chills her to the core. Suddenly, the reflection tilts its head, slightly out of sync with her own movements. She jerks backward in terror, but the reflection stays still, watching her with eyes that are no longer her own. The light in the room begins to flicker, casting shadows across her face, and she hears a faint, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the mirror, calling her name in a voice that sounds eerily like her own. Overwhelmed by fear, Helena stumbles back, knocking over a candle. The room plunges into near darkness, with only the faint glow of the mirror illuminating her face. But in that dim light, she notices something horrifying. Her reflection's hand is pressed against the glass, fingers splayed as if trying to reach through to her. She can see the fine details of the fingernails, the creases in the skin, as if it's a real hand pressing from the other side. Frozen with terror, Helena watches as her reflection begins to mouth words silently, her own lips unmoving. The reflection's lips shape the words over and over. "Let me in. Let me in." Unable to take it any longer, Helena lets out a strangled scream and stumbles out of the room, slamming the door shut. But as she stands in the hallway, breathing heavily, she hears the faint, unmistakable sound of laughter from behind the closed door, a dark and haunting echo that chills her to her very soul. The laugh is hers, but it's coming from something, or someone, trapped within the mirror, waiting patiently for the moment she lets her guard down. Helena is haunted by the events of the previous night. The laughter, her own, yet distinctly foreign, echoes in her mind, a sound too chilling to be forgotten. She tries to convince herself it was a hallucination, the result of sleep deprivation and stress, but she knows, deep down, that something dark lingers within the mirror, lurking and waiting. That night, as sleep finally claims her, she slips into a new nightmare, one far more vivid and terrifying than before. In the dream, Helena finds herself back in her grandmother's house, the air thick with silence. The walls seem closer, more oppressive, and a cold mist clings to her skin, seeping through her clothes. The house is bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow that seems to emanate from the mirror itself. Compelled by an unseen force, she is drawn toward it, her steps heavy, as though the floor beneath her feet is pulling her down. She reaches the room where the mirror stands, looming larger than ever, its surface rippling slightly as if disturbed by an invisible wind. This time, the handprints on the glass are multiplied, dozens of faint impressions, all clawing, grasping, desperate to escape. As she draws closer, her reflection appears, but it is no longer her. The figure in the glass has her face, but with hollow eyes, lips stretched in a sinister smile that twists unnaturally. The reflection steps forward, pressing both hands against the glass, and whispers in a cold, empty voice, "You left me here. You've always left me here." Helena tries to pull back, but her feet are rooted to the spot, her body refusing to obey her desperate will to flee. The reflection's hands start to push through the glass, fingers emerging from the mirror's surface, reaching for her. The glass stretches like a thin membrane, straining under the pressure of the creature within. Helena can feel an icy touch creeping up her arm as her reflection's fingers wrap around her wrist. It feels cold, deathly, as if life itself is being drained from her. Her strength ebbs away, her vision blurring as she watches the reflection pull itself further out of the mirror, inch by inch, its distorted form emerging into her world. In a final surge of panic, Helena rips her arm away, the skin numb and pale where the reflection touched her. She stumbles back, feeling her strength return as she distances herself from the mirror. But then, with a terrifying realization, she sees that her reflection isn't retreating. It's standing there, fully out of the mirror now, smiling with a face twisted in anger and triumph. Helena looks back at her own reflection and sees that her mirrored self has taken her place on the other side, trapped, pounding on the glass with desperation as she screams silently, a prisoner in her own nightmare. The twisted version of herself, the thing that has stepped out of the mirror, takes a step forward, moving with slow, deliberate malice. Helena, unable to move, feels an overwhelming dread fill her as the creature whispers, "Now I'm finally free, and you'll remain in the shadows, just like you left me." The reflection raises its hand in a mocking wave, then turns, leaving Helena trapped within the dark, distorted world on the other side of the mirror, watching helplessly as the creature in her form walks away, stealing her life and leaving her to fade into oblivion. Helena awakens with a jolt, her heart pounding, sweat coating her skin as her eyes dart around the room. She's in her own bed, in her grandmother's house, and everything seems quiet. But the memory of her nightmare lingers, the reflection, the hands, the feeling of being trapped on the other side of the mirror. It was only a dream, she tells herself, only a figment of her imagination. Yet, a creeping sense of dread remains, urging her to look at the mirror once more, as if confirming she is still herself. Reluctantly, she rises, walking slowly toward the mirror. But as she approaches, a disturbing realization freezes her in place. Her own face stares back at her, but something is undeniably wrong. There's a faint bruising around her wrist, exactly where the reflection's icy fingers had clutched her. The bruise feels numb, almost lifeless, and a cold shiver runs through her as she recalls the sensation from her nightmare. She tries to shake off the fear, reasoning that she might have grabbed her wrist in her sleep, but the memory is too vivid, too real. Driven by a need to understand, Helena begins to search through her grandmother's old belongings, hoping to uncover some clue about the mirror's origins. She finds a dusty journal hidden in the back of a drawer, its pages filled with her grandmother's handwriting. The entries speak of an old legend about the Mirror of Souls, an object crafted centuries ago by a reclusive, sinister artisan who claimed he could trap pieces of a person's soul within the glass. Her grandmother's notes detail how the mirror had been passed down through their family, with each owner warning the next to never stare too long, to never let the reflection linger. But as she reads further, Helena's horror deepens. Her grandmother's final entry mentions hearing whispers from the mirror, voices calling her name, shadows in the glass that would sometimes move without her. It warns that anyone who stares too deeply will find themselves replaced, left on the other side to suffer in silence while a twisted version of them takes their place in the real world. The words seem to leap off the page, filling Helena with dread as she realizes her nightmare wasn't just a figment of her imagination, it was a warning. As she closes the journal, something catches her eye in the reflection of the mirror. For a split second, she sees movement, a dark shadow hovering just behind her. She turns quickly, but there's no one there. The air grows heavy, a strange chill filling the room, and a faint whisper reaches her ears, almost too quiet to hear. The voice is her own, but it sounds distant, pleading, as if coming from a place far beyond the mirror's glass. Desperate, Helena leans in closer to the mirror, her face inches from the surface. Her reflection watches her, expression calm, yet there's a glimmer in its eyes that feels foreign, unfamiliar, a hint of malice. She whispers her own name, testing the boundary, her breath fogging the glass. For an instant, her reflection's face twists, a look of raw, uncontained fury flashing across it before returning to her own neutral expression. A terrifying realization settles over her. She is no longer alone in her own reflection. Something is sharing the mirror with her, something that has been waiting, watching, and is growing stronger with each look. As she backs away, heart racing, Helena realizes the nightmare is far from over. Whatever has taken root in the mirror wants more than just her reflection. It wants her soul, her life, and it's only a matter of time before the barrier between them shatters, leaving her forever on the other side, a prisoner in the cold, silent world within the glass. Haunted by the revelations in her grandmother's journal, Helena spirals into a relentless obsession. Days blur into nights as she desperately searches for answers, scouring every inch of the old house for any other writings, letters, or artifacts that might explain how to rid herself of the mirror's hold. She barely sleeps, haunted by fleeting shadows in the corner of her eye and whispers that echo faintly from the mirror's direction, calling her name in her own voice. The house itself begins to feel alive, with strange creaks and groans that seem to echo her frantic footsteps, as though something within its walls is stirring, aware of her fear. In a moment of desperation, Helena remembers an antique dealer her grandmother used to mention, a man well-versed in rare, dark artifacts and ancient lore. She contacts him, and when he finally agrees to visit, the look on his face as he sees the mirror tells her everything. He stands there, pale, eyes wide, muttering words in a language she doesn't recognize, crossing himself as though he's standing before something truly cursed. He explains that the mirror isn't just a conduit for souls. It's a prison, an artifact forged with dark intentions meant to trap and consume the essence of those it ensnares. The dealer reveals a grim history. The mirror was created by a forgotten cult obsessed with the idea of eternal life. According to legend, they believed that by capturing reflections, they could absorb the energy of those who gazed into it, granting their souls a twisted form of immortality within the glass. But over time, the mirror grew hungry, its hold over the real world growing stronger with each soul it claimed. Those who fell victim to it weren't just trapped, they were transformed, their spirits twisted into shadows of themselves, forever lurking within the mirror, waiting to replace another unsuspecting soul. Helena's pulse races as she hears the tale, but the dealer's words grow darker. He warns her that the mirror chooses its victims, drawing them in slowly, weakening their defenses until they willingly peer too deep, giving it full control over their reflection. The mirror doesn't just want to trap you, he says, voice trembling. It wants to consume you, to replace you, to live through your face and body in the real world. If you don't destroy it now, it will finish what it started. Terrified but determined, Helena realizes she must act quickly. The dealer offers her one last piece of advice. The only way to weaken the mirror's hold is through fire, but he warns her that the ritual is dangerous. If the mirror senses your intent, it will fight back, he cautions, his voice barely above a whisper. And if you fail, it may take more than just your reflection this time. With little choice, Helena gathers the materials he suggests, her mind racing with dread as she prepares for a ritual she barely understands, hoping it will be enough to end the nightmare. That night, Helena sits alone in the dim light of a single candle, the mirror looming in front of her like a dark portal. As she begins the ritual, chanting the words the dealer gave her, the air in the room grows cold, and the shadows seem to close in around her. Her voice shakes, but she forces herself to continue, her eyes locked on the mirror's glass, which now appears to swirl with a dark mist, like smoke trapped within. Suddenly, the mirror pulses with a sickly light, and Helena's reflection twists into a horrific version of herself, hollow-eyed, grinning with jagged teeth, reaching out as if trying to claw its way through the glass. The reflection slams its fists against the surface, its movements frantic, desperate, as if sensing that she's attempting to sever its hold. Her voice falters as the whispers intensify, filling her mind with memories she never lived, faces she doesn't recognize, each a soul once trapped, now clawing for freedom. As the ritual reaches its climax, the mirror cracks, a thin fracture snaking across the glass. Helena gasps, her heart pounding with both fear and hope, but then, in a terrifying twist, the reflection reaches through the crack, its icy fingers stretching out, brushing against her skin. She feels a sudden pull, a force stronger than anything she's ever known, trying to drag her into the mirror's depths. For a brief, agonizing moment, Helena sees herself, or rather, a twisted version of herself, on the other side, staring back at her with wild, victorious eyes, a dark mockery of her own face. Desperate, Helena musters every ounce of strength and pulls herself back, the mirror shattering as she breaks free from its hold. She collapses to the ground, her breaths coming in ragged gasps, surrounded by shards of broken glass. But as she glances at the fractured pieces scattered around her, she sees countless eyes staring back from each shard, reflections of those who remain trapped, their faces frozen in expressions of horror and despair. And then in one tiny fragment she sees it, her own face, still smiling, still waiting on the other side, as though the mirror's curse has only just begun. Helena gathers herself, still trembling from the encounter, as she realizes she hasn't fully escaped the mirror's grasp. Though shattered, each shard seems alive, humming with a sinister energy, the remnants of countless souls trapped within. The scattered fragments reflect back faces, distorted, silent, and filled with rage, their hollow eyes staring up at her, as if waiting for a chance to reclaim what was stolen from them. But there, in the largest shard, Helena catches a glimpse of her own reflection, and her heart stops. Her reflection doesn't mirror her frightened expression. Instead, it smirks, a cruel and twisted version of her own face, one that no longer belongs to her. Determined to end the nightmare, Helena decides to take the pieces far from the house, to bury them deep where they can no longer harm anyone. She gathers the shards, each fragment cold and heavy in her hands, radiating an unnatural chill that seeps into her bones. She drives through the night, her only goal to rid herself of the cursed mirror, to sever any lingering connection once and for all. But as the road stretches on in the silent darkness, she feels the unsettling sensation of being watched, as if eyes are boring into her from every angle. The headlights reveal nothing, yet the feeling only grows, pressing in from all sides. Suddenly, the car stalls, the engine sputtering as she's enveloped in complete silence. Desperate, she tries to restart it, but the car remains dead, leaving her stranded in the middle of an empty road with nothing but the moonlight casting eerie shadows around her. As she fumbles with her phone for light, A soft, insidious whisper fills the air, a voice that sounds achingly familiar. It's her own, calling her name from the back seat. Slowly, dread creeping through her, she turns around and sees it, her reflection, twisted and malevolent, staring back at her from the rearview mirror. The smirk on its face widens, stretching into an impossible, jagged grin that chills her to the core. Panic overtakes her as she realizes that breaking the mirror didn't sever the connection. Instead, it fractured her own soul, leaving fragments of herself in each shard, all scattered but still tied to her. The figure in the rearview mirror leans closer, its dark eyes glinting with malice. "You thought you could escape," it hisses, its voice a harsh, mocking echo. "I'm free now, and there's nowhere you can go that I can't follow." Desperately, Helena grabs one of the shards she had brought with her, intending to throw it away, but the fragment pulses in her hand, the glass warm and alive, almost as if it's breathing. Her grip loosens involuntarily, and before she can react, the shard's reflection shifts, showing not her face but a distorted vision of her past. Memories she barely recognizes, twisted versions of her childhood, her life, all tinged with darkness. She realizes with horror that the mirror has started to consume her essence, fragmenting her very identity, pulling pieces of her into each shard. As she tries to shake off the terror, the reflection in the rearview begins to speak again, recounting memories only she should know, intimate details of her life, but with a cruel, corrupted twist, as though reshaping her past to fit its own desires. It taunts her, whispering every fear she's ever had, every insecurity, every moment of doubt, warping them into fuel for its own power. Each word feels like a dagger, slicing through her defenses, weakening her resolve. "You can't escape me," it sneers. "I am you now more than you ever were." In a final act of defiance, Helena picks up a shard and presses it against her own reflection in the rearview mirror, hoping the physical connection might somehow sever the link between them. For a split second, her reflection falters, its twisted smile faltering, replaced by a flash of fury. She feels a sharp pain in her hand as the shard slices her skin, but she presses on, ignoring the blood that begins to drip, feeling the shard grow colder and heavier in her grasp. The reflection thrashes, its face contorting, its dark eyes widening in anger and fear. But just as Helena thinks she's gaining the upper hand, a voice whispers from the shard itself, her own voice, pleading, begging for release. Helena pulls back, horrified, as the realization dawns on her. Each shard contains a part of her, pieces of her own soul trapped within the broken glass, bound forever to the mirror. There's no escape, no release from the fractured prison she's created. Her reflection, still lingering in the rearview, lets out a soft, mocking laugh, a sound that chills her to the core. "You're mine now," it whispers, voice filled with malice. "And wherever you go, I'll be waiting, always watching, just beneath the surface." As Helena sits alone in the darkness, she understands the terrifying truth. She can never rid herself of the mirror. It has woven itself into her very being, an eternal, haunting presence that will follow her, just a breath away, forever lurking in any reflective surface, waiting for the moment she lets her guard down. In the days following her final confrontation with the mirror, Helena's life becomes a waking nightmare. Though she has disposed of the shards, she can't shake the feeling that something is still watching her, lurking just beneath the surface of every reflection she passes. Mirrors, windows, even polished metal, all hold a subtle threat now, as though her own image is lying in wait, biding its time. She avoids looking into any reflective surface, but sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, she catches a glimpse of herself, or rather, a twisted version of herself, smirking back at her, with eyes that hold a darkness she knows doesn't belong to her. Helena's sleep is plagued by recurring dreams. Each night, she finds herself in that same dark room from before, the fractured shards of the mirror scattered around her, each shard containing fragments of her own face, contorted in silent screams. She tries to gather the pieces, but they cut into her skin, and she feels her own essence bleeding into the glass. Each time she picks up a shard, the distorted image of herself reaches out, trying to pull her back into the mirror's dark depths. She wakes up every morning drenched in sweat, her heart racing, the faint echoes of her own voice whispering her name, as if calling her back. One evening, Helena is alone in her apartment, the only light coming from a dim, flickering lamp. She feels a prickling sensation, as if being watched, though she's certain there's no one else in the room. Unable to resist, she turns slowly toward a small mirror hanging on the wall, her fear mounting with every step. Her own face stares back, but there's something wrong. Her reflection's eyes are too dark, too empty, and her mouth is twisted into a grim smile that she knows she isn't making. The reflection tilts its head, watching her with an intensity that feels predatory, almost hungry. Helena's breath catches as the reflection raises a hand and places it against the glass, as if trying to push through. She takes a step back, heart pounding, but her reflection leans closer, its hand sliding down the glass, leaving a faint smear that looks like a shadow. In a barely audible whisper, her own voice echoes from the mirror, cold and haunting. "You thought you could escape, but I am you now. And wherever you go, I'll be waiting." Unable to look away, Helena realizes with horror that the reflection is not bound to the mirror anymore. Her twisted double has found a way to seep into every reflective surface, following her wherever she goes, watching her every move. She stumbles backward, bumping into her phone, which has fallen screen up on the table. In the darkened glass of the screen, she sees the reflection grinning back at her, closer now, its eyes brimming with malice. Panicked, she grabs a cloth and throws it over the mirror, but when she turns back to her phone, the reflection is still there, faint yet undeniably present, smiling up at her from the black screen. Desperate to escape, Helena considers smashing every mirror, every reflective surface, but she knows it would be futile. The mirror's curse has taken root in her own soul, woven into her essence like a shadow she can never outrun. She tries to block out her reflection as best as she can, covering windows and avoiding anything that might reveal the dark version of herself, but the sense of being watched never fades. Every time she turns a corner or enters a dimly lit room, she feels its presence, lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to take over completely. As Helena descends into paranoia, friends begin to notice her erratic behavior. She tries to explain, but her story sounds unbelievable, even to herself. People think she's lost her mind, and she starts to wonder if they're right. Yet, deep down, she knows the truth. She is never alone, and she never will be again. Her reflection has become an eternal shadow, lingering in the dark, forever watching her with that same cruel smile. Imagine looking into a mirror, only to see a stranger staring back, someone who knows your every secret, your every fear, and who is waiting for the chance to escape. If you ever see your own reflection, do something you didn't look away. And whatever you do, don't let it out. Have you ever felt watched by your own reflection? Share your stories in the comments below, and let us know if you would dare to look into the mirror of souls. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because who knows what shadows may be lurking just behind the glass, waiting to escape.